Welcome to our first ring lecture session of the season. And I got to tell you, I am so smug that we were able to arrange this one as a starting event. These guys have a story. I knew it was interesting, but I think I still underestimated it. They have a story to share with you that I think is really a great start for, in many respects, for our program. Our sort of senior guest here is Paul Phillips, and with him is Derek Perkins, and I'm going to let Paul introduce Derek. But meanwhile, let me tell you just a little bit about Paul Phillips. He's a Gator graduate twice. He got involved. I hope he'll tell you a little bit about how he got involved with Prudential. He went to work with them, and most of you shop at the Oaks Mall. That was his first deal, putting that together with Alan Squitieri, between Prudential and Alan Squitieri here. So Paul has left us his monument out there where we all shop. And he was, when we first connected with Paul, he was already well on his way in leading Prudential. I made a mistake. In my class, I said he was responsible for the Asian real estate investments with Prudential. That's wrong. He led Prudential out of the United States into 5 continents and oversaw the investments in 5 continents in various roles and forms. So I don't know anybody who could claim more experience or more perspective on international real estate development. He's been involved in direct property investments, fund activities, entity-level investments. He was affiliated with GRA Singapore, Pricoa Realty Trust, or Realty Group, and then more recently, Taurus Stornoway Investments. And now, IDI has managed to attract him, and he's leading their efforts to develop a portfolio of real estate investment. IDI has been known as one of the leading industrial development groups in the world, and now they're through Paul, they're opening up a new dimension of their activity. So with that, I could go on, but I think it's a way better thing to let Paul and Derek tell you about themselves and about IDI. So welcome back to campus.
Thank you very much, and go Gators, everybody. It's great to be back. I want to introduce my colleague, Derek Perkins. Derek's been with IDI for about 5 years. He actually predates me, so he has seniority. I brought him along just in case you guys can understand me. He's more your age, so he can translate. Okay, but it's great to be back on campus. I'm going to talk a little bit about the global supply chain and what IDI does in industrial real estate. Derek's going to talk a little bit about our tools, our research tools that we have developed. He coordinates our research activity for us at IDI and has done a great job coming up with some very interesting ways of looking at markets and market segmentation for industrial real estate. We have a lot of slides here. I'm going to try to go quickly, but I thought it might be really smart to start with an overview of what IDI is with a video, a corporate video that we have that lasts about 5 minutes. So we'll do that. And then we'll talk about thinking outside the box. What is industrial real estate? Does anybody know what it is? Warehouses in the supply chain and why institutions like them. We had a small group before this talking about IDI and what it does, and they were very honest that they had no idea industrial real estate was this important, this big, and that institutional investors love it so much. So hopefully we'll give you a sense of that through the course of the presentation. We'll also talk about the investor appetite for this stuff, how funds are built, how their portfolios are constructed, what role industrial real estate plays in portfolios very quickly, look at supply and demand and some of the tools that Derek has developed, and then talk about the future. So with that,
the global economy is constantly evolving, growing and changing as businesses and their customers demand more. As global demands shift, the logistics industry is shifting with them. Today's logistics business is more than just trains, planes, ships, and trucks. It's a complex system of global networks and supply chain management issues that require more focus and precision than ever before. Since 1989, IDI has been one of the leading service providers and developers of industrial warehouse and distribution space in North America. The company is solely focused on the logistics industry through its network of Class A industrial real estate investments and properties. Through peaks and valleys in the real estate market, IDI has set the standard as a proactive partner to the world's Fortune 500 and leading private and public companies by providing an unmatched level of expertise and client commitment. Serving multiple portfolios valued at $1.6 billion, IDI's team is a model of both efficiency and effectiveness. Not only are team members tenured and focused on the task at hand, they are also at the heart of the company's extensive community outreach programs and industry-leading sustainability initiatives. By keeping a pulse on global trends while staying locally focused, IDI staff understands the people and community dynamics where they do business. 8 market-based offices offer depth at a local level, while the company's scope offers breadth through a national footprint, with service areas in investments, development, property management, and leasing. Since 1989, IDI has completed more than 127 million square feet of inventory buildings and build-to-suit projects, and acquired another 7 million square feet for a cost of $325 million. In total, IDI has developed 7,200 acres, with a current inventory of 3,800 acres of entitled land available for use today. With foreign and domestic capital resources, strong geographic diversification, and defined revenue streams through its service areas and joint venture partnerships, IDI is well capitalized, diversified, and well positioned. Through the support of Japanese parent company Kajima, as well as joint venture partnerships with JP Morgan and TIAA, among others, IDI is able to continue its track record of positioning buildings to achieve above-market returns and optimize value for investors. In fact, thanks to an unmatched level of integrity and sound financial partnerships, IDI was able to further diversify the company's revenue streams in 2009, when the company formed its own investment management and research division. IDI's first fund was launched in 2010. Not only does IDI do things right, it also does the right thing. With more than 8 million square feet of space already LEED certified or in the process of becoming certified, and a LEED Gold headquarters, IDI looks to responsible development as the only model. Ethical practices, charitable giving, work-life balance, and protecting the earth are essential to the company's philosophy and the enduring relationships its team members build with each other and the clients they serve. Strategically located across North America, the real estate veterans at IDI can be counted on to deliver unmatched expertise to serve their clients and protect local communities. Through environmentally responsible building practices and the selection of locations that are optimized for convergence with both intermodal traffic flow and population centers, IDI's buildings have long set the standard. A strength in people, facilities, finances, and sustainability will continue to allow IDI and its clients to innovate and retain a leadership position, not only for the near term, but for the long term as the global economy continues its evolution.
That's the most expensive turtle on the planet. We have lots of stories about that turtle. So, there's that better. IDI, as the video tells you, it's been around since 1989. Fully focused on logistics. We don't do anything else. We don't do multifamily. We don't do office. We don't do retail. All we do is real estate related to supply chains and serving supply chains. We have 9 offices. The offices are located around your primary distribution nodes for supply chains in North America: Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Inland Empire in California, Fort Lauderdale. So, with our corporate offices in Atlanta. We've developed about $6 billion worth of this stuff. We've sold most of it to institutional portfolios. And in 2009 decided that we would start keeping it for ourselves and sell as little as possible going forward. That was in an effort to diversify our own income. So we're not depending strictly on being a merchant developer to safeguard our health going forward. If nothing else, the sharp downturn in 2008 proved that we needed to modify our business model. So that's why I joined. Wayne asked me to say a few words about where I came from before I was at IDI. I was University of Florida, veterinarian wannabe, no vet school. I was a pretty good student, except when the Gators were good and I was horrible. But when I finished, I wanted to become a veterinarian, so I joined the Peace Corps and went to Malaysia, where I spent 2 years working with a veterinary school that was being developed just outside Kuala Lumpur, and really loved it. I loved the job. What I wound up doing was essentially building laboratory animal facilities for the school, managing their budgets, and just administering the creation of a new campus, and thought it was pretty cool. I came back to school here. E.T. York, who passed away recently, was kind enough to help get me financed so I could go to grad school. He basically did it on the back of an envelope in his office, and I'll never forget that. He was quite a guy. And I went to graduate school, thought I was going into the State Department, had a job lined up, and my major professor said to me one day, "Hey, Paul, I think you ought to interview with this gentleman that's on campus. You're right up his alley." And the next thing you know, I went to work for Prudential in Orlando, Florida. Started in their agricultural portfolio doing farm loans, and some of those groves turned into industrial developments. My first deal was actually a development of an industrial project in Orlando Central Park in Orlando. And then I got involved in this shopping mall here in Gainesville, which took about 4 years out of my life, but it was wonderful. Got to come to Gainesville all the time. It's always a good thing. I was about 26 or 7 years old, so it was perfect. So the Oaks Mall, it's my fault. All the traffic problems, all the water issues, everything else, you can blame it on me. I can take it. I spent 23 years at Peru and developed their international business. Lived in London, Singapore, took the family with me wherever we went. Came back to run the international program as its president. Realized I liked building businesses more than I liked running an overall organization. So we got it settled down. I retired, started doing some student housing with Nathan Collier. Arranged some financing for him, some equity financing. Great experience there. Got sidetracked like everybody else with a crash. Wound up with IDI because, as fate has it, I was working on a industrial placement with a German open-ended fund with IDI as a joint venture partner when Lehman crashed. I was actually in Frankfurt when Lehman crashed, and you wouldn't believe the panic. To be in a banking center like that when Lehman went under was just unbelievable. But that deal did not make, but IDI said to me, "We need an investment management platform. Would you come and build it?" And so, long story short, I said yes. Been focused on industrial real estate since. Funny that I would start with it, my first deal being an industrial project with Prudential, and then wind up this being my swan song in real estate, I think. So if we think outside the box a little bit about what warehouses are, I think you'll find that it's an integral part of investor portfolios and incredibly important to each of us here as supply chains serve our day-to-day needs. Just to use a couple of quick phrases to guide this conversation, logistics is about moving things from where they were made to where they're going to be consumed in a convenient way. And a warehouse is essentially a hotel for goods. It's, that's the way I look at it. Short-term inventory stays there and it moves out. And you can't have one without the other. They go together. In the U.S., there are about 175,000 different warehouses. there's 9 million square feet, serving a population of 308 million people. So if you do the math, it's about 30 square feet per person in the United States. But there's a problem with that statistic, 30 per square foot. It's probably not the right indicator, is it? Cubic feet would probably be the best way to think about it. Warehouses are typically 30 feet high. They're racked. All the things that you have, that you wear, that you use, come from these technologically interesting pick and pack systems where the robots go up, they pick the things out of boxes, they wind up in a box and ship to you overnight, and that's how it all works. So cubic feet's probably a better indicator. That number of 30 feet per person probably says a lot about what's happened to the growth of the U.S. economy, and also about efficiency and the use of warehouse space over time. So we'll get into some of that. If you look at what drives a warehouse operator user's decision, these are the things that come into play. Transportation represents about 50% of the cost of operating a logistics operation. Inventory's 22, labor's 10, customer service 8, rent. That's the hotel rental rate, is about 4% of the cost of the good. That's wonderful news for IDI, because as technology changes and these companies change their supply chains, it's very simple for them to say, real estate's not a big part of the expense here, let's build a new and better box. And that's where we come in. The population centers around the world define where these boxes go. We'll get into some of this in a few minutes. What's really interesting now is that warehouses used to go where capital went. Investors like Pru, like Jones Lang LaSalle, want to be in markets where they know there's an exit for their investment, so they can sell it. Now with sophisticated financings, bondable leases and CTL financing, warehouses can go just about anywhere, and we're seeing that happen. So while you still have to service population centers for the big boxes in the supply chain, they can go anywhere, and they can be financed anywhere. If you look at how goods are moved throughout the country, there's generally there are about 3 different models. There's a single DC model, a double DC model, and a multiple DC model. Typically, a single DC model is going to situate himself someplace in the United States where, with 1 or 2 days truck travel, you can get anything to about 80% of the population. So the heartland of the United States is where you find these kinds of DC models. DC being distribution center models. And obviously, if you look at that target right there, Federal Express comes to mind in Memphis, Tennessee. That's why they're in Memphis. That's why UPS is in Louisville. It's all about spatial location. If you go to a 2 DC model, you'll probably have some kind of Inland Empire representation around the Port of Los Angeles, which is the largest port in the United States, and something over around Cincinnati, so you can service the East Coast and the Midwest. And we see a lot of those. Williams-Sonoma is a good one that comes to mind there. Williams-Sonoma services all of its stores and customers through a 2 DC model. A multiple DC model might be like Ross stores. This is actually their footprint. This is how they do it. East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast. And then somebody like an Amazon will have 5 or 6 of these everywhere. In fact, they've just tweaked their supply chain. They're building 14 new million square foot distribution centers for their new footprint. This is a quick kind of graphic of how the global supply chain works, where it originates, how it gets to where it's finally picked, packed, and sent to you. China, of course, is the largest supplier of goods in the world today. Everything starts in China. Um, the biggest port in the States being Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, containers are offloaded. Trains pick up the containers. They take an enormous volume of containers from the Port of Los Angeles to Chicago, where the containers are broken apart. All the goods go into warehouses. They're picked, they're packed, and they're shipped off to consumers. So all this is a very complicated kind of global chain of supply. In the States, you see this, the map that looks like my, a CAT scan of my brain, I think, up there on the top right. That's a congestion map of what's about to happen in the United States with truck traffic. So all of this is a complicated kind of cocktail of variables that go into making an efficient spatial decision for where you should put a warehouse. And we'll get into some of that here in just a moment. But in its simplest form, the logistics business is aligned to logistics infrastructure, trucking, air, shipping, intermodal transportation, and container handling. The technology for warehousing has changed considerably. And when I say technology, I mean just that. It's amazing what's happened even in the last 5 years. If you look at this, this picture here, you'll see two of our warehouses on the top. Those represent kind of state-of-the-art warehouses, the things that we built at IDI. And then at the bottom, you see what is likely to be the average warehouse in the universe of warehouse real estate that's tracked by NACREIF and by CBRE Torto Wheaton. I think the average building was built in the United States was built around 1973 in the CBRE database. It's 57,000 square feet, and it's probably 20 feet of clear height. And clear height is what determines how you rack. You rack your warehouse so you can pack goods in it in a cubic way. So none of that fits the modern container flow of goods. So the technology has changed considerably to buildings that are taller, they're more efficient, they have sustainable features in them like stormwater runoff, low impact lighting, and dock levelers that are automatic. They read the trucks and they level themselves, all the way to automated picking and packing, and even robots that come and pick things at one end of a warehouse and take it to the middle where it's all put into boxes. It's a fascinating technology. Derek was reminding a smaller group before this meeting that if you figure that one of these large warehouses, like the one at the top, is what might be 1.2 million square feet and a half a mile long, having a human being go pick goods from one rack at one end of the warehouse and then go to the other, he wouldn't make it very long as an employee. So the automated systems are really fantastic for making these warehouses work. So for what we do, we focus on the warehouses that are in the 200,000 to 1 million square foot range. All of our buildings look alike. It's a very high quality construction. We think about our buildings. We spend more on them. We care about sustainability, especially when it makes sense. And our buildings are highly desired by institutional investors. These are some examples, and they're all just a little bit different. We've broken down the warehouses, and I won't steal Derek's thunder here. I'll let him talk about why we did this. Into three categories: super bulk warehouses, light industrial warehouses, and bulk warehouses. If you track the way if you track the demand drivers behind the performance of these buildings, you'll find that they're totally different. I mean, the correlation to GDP for a bulk building is very low. For a light industrial, it's very high, and I'll let Derek show you some of that. So we've decided that the best way to look at industrial warehousing by market is by segmenting buildings based upon the attributes of local markets. This is a Home Depot example that we put up here. This was Home Depot decided in about 2004 that there was a more efficient way for it to distribute things to its stores. It completely changed its supply chain solution. Prior to 2004, they were leasing smaller buildings. Anything they could get in a marketplace, they would lease. They had no way thinking about what's the optimal way of moving goods through the supply chain. So they came up with this model, and they rolled out about 14 of these things. You might remember I showed you the graph where 3% of the cost of a good is the real estate. It's not that much money, so that's why they could do this. So they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing a supply chain solution that was more efficient. And most of this was exercised during the downturn. So what they were doing is they couldn't generate profits from the revenue side of the P&L. So they were looking for ways to reduce expense. And so they invested in long-term solutions like this. Other companies that invested like this during the downturn include people like Colgate, Clorox. We did a large build-to-suit for Clorox in Atlanta as part of a multi-building supply chain tweak. And again, Home Depot. Derek, you want to take over from here?
Good afternoon. Just want to take you through a little bit about why investors choose to invest in industrial real estate. So what we have here, this is the typical plan sponsor. So this is somebody like a state pension fund or a public company pension fund that has assets to invest on behalf of their employees. So what this is a study done by Kingsley and IDI, that's Institutional Real Estate magazine. And what they did is they asked these pension funds, so what is your allocation like? What is your target allocation? Where do you put your money? And so what they found is that of this 100%, roughly 10% goes to real estate. And we're going to talk about why and it comes to that. A lot of it has to do with income stream. And so Paul, if you want to tell us a little bit about case studies.
There's a state plan has $156 billion in assets, its pension fund. They might allocate 10% to real estate, and then of that 10%, they'll allocate another, say, 10 to 15% to industrial real estate. So, in the case of plan sponsor A, who I can't name, they have a grand total of an allocation of about $800 billion out of $156 billion of assets that are allocated to industrial real estate. Now, that's how much they've allocated. What they actually have is less than half of that, and they've never been able to get over less than half of what their target allocation is. So they all want it because it performs so well in portfolios. The risk-adjusted returns are extremely good. There's not a lot of variation of return because you have stable income. You've got tenants that generally have good credit. You don't have a lot of capital expenses for rollovers of leases, so it's just really good, solid stuff, and you can depend on it in your portfolio.
So these guys are managing, what we find is about an 8% annual return is what they need to meet their pension liabilities. They need 8% return on the capital they have invested. So this is some detail. This is the National Council of Real Estate Investment Fiduciaries, and NACREIF. Y'all heard of NACREIF and what they do? What NACREIF is back in the late 70s, they needed a way to track the performance of privately held industrial and institutional grade real estate. And so unlike the stock market that trades every day and you have a nice graph, real estate doesn't. So what they did is they asked all these privately held real estate funds to submit the valuations of their portfolios and the returns so that we could track the performance of real estate. And so with this database, what we can do is I can look at the broad NACREIF index, which represents about 6,000 properties, and see what the institutions are holding. So to Paul's point here, the blue line, which is industrial real estate, these pension funds hold about 10 to 15% in industrial real estate. And this is probably a little on the high side compared to what we're seeing from the people we speak to. They just can't get enough, whether it's because you know, the size of the properties is hard to obtain the quantity they need. And here's that in a nutshell, why they choose industrial real estate. So here's the income return annualized. So industrial has averaged about an 8% annual income return from the period of 1990 to 2011. And you look at that in terms of return, it's the highest among all the other three asset classes: office, multifamily, retail. Hotel exceeds it, but then you look at the volatility, the standard deviation of that return, and it's much higher for hotel. So industrial gives a really nice risk-adjusted return. And the large reason for that is you have strong quality tenants. You have tenants like Home Depot, Clorox, Kraft that are renting your buildings. You have 5-year leases, so you don't have a lot of rollover, and you don't have much capital expenditures in a warehouse. You're not every 5 years like in an office building refreshing the lobby, for example. It's concrete, it's very simple. So that's why investors really love industrial real estate. It's good for us, they can't get enough of it. Here's a little breakdown that shows you. As Paul mentioned, the industrial universe, there's 266,000 industrial properties in the United States, representing 14.1 billion square feet. So that's the total universe. Average size of those buildings, 53,000 square feet. So much smaller than what, say, the pension funds hold. So the pension funds, on average, their average size building is 213,000 square feet and an average age of 1991. So they prefer the much newer, much more modern buildings because it gives them the liquidity. It gives them the ability to attract the tenants, to get nice rent growth, to have a market to exit those buildings. And then a little bit about where we fit in. So Paul heads up our investment management group, which is what I'm a part of. And so what we do is we try to match the pension funds with the industrial real estate they desire. We closed our first core fund in August of 2010. We're in the fundraising stages to follow on core programs and value-added programs, which we hope to close later this year. And our goal is to have about $3 billion of assets under management by 2013. So with the environment that we're in, with institutions seeking industrial real estate to meet their pension obligations, is a really good place for us. I wanted to talk a little bit about where my role is. I work for IDI in the research department. I started with IDI in the finance department. I graduated with an undergrad in finance. Had no idea I was going to get into real estate. Was hoping to kind of end up in the stock market somewhere. And a real estate company came knocking my door saying they do in industrial warehouse. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. You're going to give me a job? Cool, I'll take it. So I got started with this, and you know, it's been really interesting to look at how these buildings perform and what they're correlated with. Because as you all notice when we get into this, it really has nothing to do with some of the demand drivers from the other asset classes. When you look at office, you look at retail, you look at multifamily, you're looking at things like local economy. You're looking, you know, what's the GDP in the economy? How's the employment situation doing? What's going on there? Whereas logistics, it's really an international picture of path of goods movement. So here's the composition again of the U.S. industrial market. 14.1 billion square feet. Of that, only 13% is what we consider modern, is what institutional grades seek. So that is properties that are bigger than 50,000 square feet, 1995 and newer. We picked 1995 because that is the age in warehouses where we generally feel like the clear heights, the design, the layout is sophisticated enough for today's modern logistics user. And then those are our classifications, also warehouses that are for rent only. So when we look at our research, we're only thinking about 13% of the entire universe. And many of you all have seen this. This is a typical brokerage report. So if you go out on C.B. Richard Ellis's website or Grubb and Ellis website or Colliers or Jones Lang LaSalle, you'll get this typical market report for a market. And what you'll quickly notice is that when they're talking about the Atlanta industrial market, they're talking about the whole thing. They're talking about buildings that were built in 1960, including in their database. So as you all know, when you're benchmarking a return or looking at supply and demand analytics, you want to focus on what is clearly relevant to what you're doing. So what we did is we took that 13.1 million square, or 13% of the 14.1 billion square feet and divided it up. As Paul mentioned earlier, we divided it into 3 major categories. Our light industrial, which is 50 to 250,000 square feet, bulk, and then super bulk, which is the half-mile long, modern logistics footprint. And so let me tell you a little about why we divided this up. So we focus on the 14.1, we focus on the 13% of that, and we divide that 13% up into these 3 categories. So the super bulk buildings, these buildings here are 600,000 square feet and up. They cater to your large regional or national distribution. They're cross-docked, meaning you take goods from one side, process it through the warehouse, and then send it out on the other side. 600,000 square feet up, you have lots of trailer parking. You'll see that on the left and right side of this building. Capacity for expansion land. If you look at the picture on your left at the top, you can see at the end of the warehouse there's additional room for expansion land. And these buildings, their demand is really driven by supply chain changes. And so to Paul's point, we've seen a lot of companies invest in warehouses even when the economy was down. So these, when we look at performance, in most markets, these buildings have done exceedingly well. Rents have fully recovered. They've been there. There's very few supply left in any of these markets. And we've seen a lot of build-to-suit demand coming up. And we, in fact, believe that a lot of the new inventory development coming out of the cycle will be in these larger buildings. Next on down the size ranking, we have bulk distribution. These buildings are 250 to 600,000 square feet. These represent about 10% of the industrial buildings, modern industrial buildings in the United States by count. They're home of the 3PL and retailers. And really what these are driven by is kind of the corporate expectations of how their markets and how their prospects for future business look. As far as supply and demand goes, these were really the hot place for development leading into the cycle. So there was a lot of overbuilding in this area. These buildings are usually about 400 feet deep, or front or rear load. By that we mean is where are the docks located in relation to the office. So the rear load, they're in the back. So you have the truck court behind, the office in the front. This building here on the right-hand side of the screen is what we call a rear load, where the truck doors are in the back. And then finally, the last category is light industrial. These are your multi-tenant buildings. If you look at this building, you can see what we call storefronts, where you have the offices on the front. Typically shallow, anywhere from 100 to 200 feet deep, rear load. And these are what we affectionately refer to as the bread and butter of the United States economy. So 80% of the modern logistics buildings fit inside of this bucket. And in fact, if you look at the correlation of light industrial demand, so the change in occupancy versus the Dow Jones, that correlation is 0.95. So generally, as the economy goes, so does demand for these spaces. And we saw that in the last cycle. So as the economic prospects looked down, we saw companies exiting their space and leaving their space. And as we hope the economy comes back up, we expect those spaces to absorb quickly. So looking a little bit into how we address these markets. So I mentioned we segment, we focus on the modern logistics space. This is a picture of Memphis. So this is kind of how we look at a market. As you can see, Memphis has about 195 million square feet of industrial space, and of that, 54 million square feet is what we would call logistics quality. And then from there, we break down the logistics segments into light industrial, bulk, and super bulk. And so what you can see here is that while the overall availability rate on the right-hand side of the screen is 19.1%, it varies dramatically for the different size buildings. So what you'll see here is, for example, in the super bulk, the 600,000 square feet and up, the availability is running 15% with 0.9 years supply remaining. That's one of our metrics we developed I'll tell you a little bit more about. So that spot of the market is very, very tight. In fact, I think there's only about 1 or 2 spaces available in the entire Memphis over 600,000 square feet. You look at the light industrial, lots of supply remaining, 8.4 years in terms of how much annual absorption there is. So there's a lot of overbuilding in that space. And so you look at a Memphis and you take a snapshot and you look at the broad industrial picture, you say, oh, 19.5%, that's not good. Memphis, slow economy, not a lot going on there, I don't want to invest in it. But when you really dig in, you can find that there is a sweet spot in this place where you can make a lot of money and do really well. Before we move forward, I want to talk about 2 of our metrics we developed. So we do all this, we look at about 25 to 30 markets, we segment into 3 segments, so every quarter we've got all this data and we need a quick way to look at it, analyze it, and figure out, well, where do we want to invest? So we developed these 2 metrics. One of them is called years excess supply remaining and percent normal absorption. What years supply remaining does is it takes the current amount of available space and divides that by the amount of historical annual absorption. So essentially, if you had a normal pace of absorption, how long is it going to take you to absorb all that space that's currently in the marketplace? So it's better than comparing just straight availability rates, because is a 19% availability rate okay in Memphis? How's that in Inland Empire? Which one are you more worried about? This really puts into perspective in terms of how much space the market can use. And the second metric we developed is called percent normal absorption, where much of the same way we take the trailing 4-quarter absorption, because absorption is pretty cyclical. We see a lot of demand in the 4th quarter where it's kind of slow in the summer when brokers are on vacation. And so we take the 4-quarter demand, divide it into the normal absorption, and that brings us to how the market is performing in terms of demand. And this is how we look at it. So don't get overwhelmed by the dots here and you don't have to take notes on this. There is no quiz later on. You're all going to ask that question. So what we've done here is we've taken all of these segments. So here's roughly 90 segments in the United States. We've plotted them. So we've looked at demand on the y-axis, percent of normal absorption, and supply on the x-axis. And so we can look at it and say, okay, which markets are really tight, or which ones are lagging behind. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, that's kind of what we call the sweet spot. High leasing, low supply, strong potential for rent growth. You see a market like SLC, that's Salt Lake City. We're starting our first inventory building there in the fall. Absorption is high, 200% of the peak during 2003 to 2007. There's vacancy or availability is below 10%, so very, very tight market. We've pre-leased the building. We're expecting that available space to lease up very, very quick. And so there's New Jersey Turnpike Super Bulk, Inland Empire Super Bulk. And then you kind of look at the reverse end of the spectrum in the lower left-hand corner. Look at where we were just talking about Memphis Bulk and Memphis Light Industrial. Lots of supply in the marketplace, slow demand. So it's going to be a long time before rent growth comes into play. So this kind of helps us as we develop our investment strategy and pick markets and pick segments and look to where we're going in the future. So if this is a lot of information to handle, one of the things we can do with this tool, we call it the iMAQ. We're playing off the iPad, iPhone, all that stuff. So what? I am. I had explained to Paul what an iPad was. Okay. What this does is it takes the three segments and it tracks the movement of them over time. So this is the Inland Empire. The Inland Empire is just west of LA. It's been the place where a lot of the modern logistics development has gone on in the last 10 years. I think the market's grown at an annualized pace of 8% a year in terms of demand, so very, very strong growth. And what you see here is you can see how the supply and demand has moved over the last 3 years. So if you look at the purple line, Super Bulk, that's the 600,000 square feet and up. Going into the cycle in 2009, it was tight supply. In 2010, the trailing 4 quarters demand fell off a little bit. But in the last year, from the second quarter of 2010 to 11 Q2, that very top dot, you see the market has become exceptionally tight. And we've seen rent growth actually occur in these buildings. So while some segments and some markets in the United States have lots of supply and aren't growing so strong, the Inland Empire has bounced back very quickly. We've actually seen rents quickly recover to the 2003 to 2007 level already and rapidly increasing. And this is another tool we've developed. So just another way we look at industrial real estate. This is our rental growth tool. What we've done here is we've taken a few different pieces of our sources. So CBRE EA, that's formerly Toro Wheaton. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. They provide us some data on local markets. So we take their trending rent growth, we plot that in the blue line, and then we overlay that with the purple dots. Those are actual leasing comps that occur in the marketplace. And so what we did here to illustrate how this tool works is if you look at the purple dots that show the leases that were signed in third quarter of 2010 to first quarter of 2011, you see how the rents have trended upwards. And since this tool is backdated, what the green line shows you is where in the second quarter of 2010 we expected rents to happen. We expected rents to spike quickly because of the amount of supply that was left in the marketplace and the historical demand, and they actually did that. If you look at the purple dots, you can see how quickly rents moved up. And we've seen in the market, we're hearing from a local development guy that rents are quickly moving up. People who have started putting buildings out are seeing rents exceed their pro forma expectations. And the purple line, the curve there, is the rent growth that CBRE EA is projecting, and they're projecting 4 to 5% rent growth in this market. So very strong, very tight supply and demand from tenants. So this is a tool we use when we're building models for our investors to see how rents are going to grow in the future. So we're taking all this information that we get from our third-party sources, we're slicing it up. We're looking at modern institutional grade real estate only to focus on where we invest. And so this is just one of the things we do that is unique to us that really gives us an edge on our competition, helps us understand our markets and supply chain trends better than anyone else. So I'm going to turn it back over to Paul.
Why don't you stay up there and we'll start taking questions.
Sure.
Wayne gave us guidance for 45 minutes, so it's been about 45 minutes so far. But I think, don't need that.
Okay.
I think the statement that the only constant is change is true. Technology is changing this business. The scarcity of good land around major population centers is forcing tenants out into the hinterlands. Places like the intersection of 78 and 81 out in Pennsylvania are looking really, really good for big box distribution centers that are an hour away from the Port of New Jersey and New York and can service 50, 60% of the East Coast population within a day's travel.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Could you go ahead and put the microphone on so we can...
You can't hear?
Yeah, we are taping, so we...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's for future viewers.
I can do that.
They can't read those. Thank you.
So things are changing. The institutional investors, I think, are going to change the way they buy this stuff. They used to would only buy in Dallas and Atlanta and Chicago. They're buying in Columbia, South Carolina now. They're buying in Chattanooga, Tennessee, because long term, those are with container-driven distribution. Those are locations that make sense. I like to tell this story because I'm old enough to have a lot of experiences. And I was in 1986. I was in San Francisco running the Pacific Northwest portfolio for Prudential. And a guy came to us and said, I've got 3,000 acres in the Inland Empire. I said, what's the Inland Empire? He says, 3,000 acres, Ontario, California. They're calling it the Inland Empire because it's going to be the distribution center for the world in the next 20 years. You couldn't get institutional money to go. Look at it today. It's enormous. It's the biggest warehouse market in the United States by a factor of 2 or 3. It's huge. We think the central part of Pennsylvania is going to be that in the next 10 years. So that's the kind of change that we can take advantage of. The biggest risks we see is what if consumers don't consume anymore? What if that appetite doesn't come back? What if all the China trade that was generated, that generated all the port activity in Los Angeles and caused this big supply chain investment from LA to Chicago, what if that doesn't come back? I don't doubt the American consumer's ability to consume. I think it'll come back. I think the world needs it. And I certainly believe that given our capital markets, the freedoms that we have, the transparency in our marketplaces, that you'll see a huge rebound led by consumer confidence once we get our political act in order in the United States. And change is scary, but it's always good. And it's the responsibility of managers in training like you to figure out how to deal with it. So thank you for having us here. Appreciate any questions you might have. We'll be happy to answer them.
What is it about Pennsylvania that has you thinking that that's the next great distribution center?
Its proximity to the ports of New Jersey and New York. You can get there within an hour. Great highway access, Highway 78, 81, Interstates 95, or Interstates 95, 81, 78, and just proximity to the population centers. So you can, it's in a 2 DC model. That's definitely a choice that would work. So we feel really good about that location.
Also, over New Jersey, there's also a significant economics advantage. It's cheaper to build a building in Pennsylvania. Labor's a little bit more friendly there. CSX has a crescent corridor that runs up from the south to the north, and there's a large intermodal there, so companies are taking advantage of that. And we've seen, in the last few years, as we're talking about the cycle, we've seen 8 or 9 large Super Bowl build-to-suits going on in Pennsylvania from some of those same companies we had on the screen earlier. So it is becoming kind of the next frontiers. I don't know if it'll end up like the Inland Empire, but it's certainly growing. Well,
in our post-crisis strategy, which we're now executing, we have actually started spec development. Whenever I say spec, you're supposed to hit me because the bankers don't like you to talk about spec development, so we call it inventory development.
I didn't say spec when I was speaking.
I did.
I'm a trade.
So we have started inventory development. We have approved 5 projects, 3 more are coming, and we are looking for land in Pennsylvania. We're looking for land in South Florida, and we're looking for land in the Inland Empire. So things are moving in the right direction. Please.
When you guys are looking at development, do you partner with the transportation companies, or is it more you IDI markets where transportation's already set up, the infrastructure's already there? Or do they sort of follow where you guys go? How does that?
The companies that provide the logistics services are called 3PLs, third-party logistics providers. They're our tenants. So we don't get into the actual logistics business, logistics operations. We provide the hotels along the way for goods to sit and be shipped, packed.
Take on Jacksonville, which I know you well, and the development of the port there, and opportunities you guys would have around that.
We had this conversation before, and it's a really good question. Jacksonville's my home. The problem with Jacksonville is there are several. The port itself is inland. There's a big bridge that the super container ships, the new Panamax class ships, can't deal with. And it's a small port authority, so it doesn't have the financial resources of, say, Savannah, which has a state port authority behind it. So what's happened is the smaller ports, what they've done to survive is they've marketed to a certain kind of business to use their ports. And in Jacksonville, they cater to what they call the ro-ro business, roll on, roll off, automobile related. If you're ever fishing in the St. Johns River out there by the jetties, you'll see these gigantic car carriers come in bringing all the Toyotas into Jacksonville. So Jacksonville's going to do quite well for itself, focusing on that ro-ro business. They're hurting right now because they overbuilt Jacksonville so terribly that they're going to be years getting out. And then the Toyotas, in trouble after the tsunami destroyed so much property in Japan. So Jacksonville's going to be hurting for a while. But from our point of view, years ago, we made the election to focus around the Port of Savannah. But Savannah's got its own issues. The state doesn't have the money to do the necessary harbor deepening to 55 feet, which is an enormous project. What was that, $600 million? $600 million. To deepen the harbor. Right now, the ships, the large Panama Canal container ships, they need 55 feet of depth of the channel. The ships can only come in at high tide, so that will get done. That's just too important to the entire East Coast not to get done. So we expect that to get funded after the election.
Now, do you guys primarily? You were talking about CSX a minute ago. How much railway type of logistical properties do you guys invest in, or is it like non-existent?
Well, we made the election a long time ago not to get into the intermodal business. Some guys really got into it in a big way, like Centerpoint. Centerpoint in Chicago, they've got two huge intermodal projects, and that really represents the lion's share of their business. We're kind of like the hotel operators in the supply chain. We want to build the boxes. The intermodal facilities are not what we deal with. The importance of rail, from my point of view, is not as important as the truck is, and that's all because of containers. Rail is important in the supply chain movement in getting containers, double stacking containers on the rail carriers and getting them from LA to Chicago. That's where rail is really important. So the intermodal concept is wonderful, and it's an efficient way to move things. But then the rest of it's all done by truck. So we've not really focused on rail, and having rail service to our warehouses has been critical. And in fact, only about 7% of warehouses are rail served in this country.
By intermodal, you mean rail to truck primarily?
Yes. Yeah.
Considered adding manufacturing or flex R&D type space to your portfolio?
Manufacturing, yes, especially things that are clean, like co-location facilities, backup computer service operations. Flex space we don't like. We've done some of it, especially in South Florida and smaller markets where we have infill sites where you can't put a big box on them. So we might do a flex space, but it's generally more cumbersome to deal with, more capital improvements for as tenants fall out. The credit behind the leases is not as good. It's just not as lucrative a business or safe a business as doing bulk warehousing. Good question.
How much difference is the widening of the Panama Canal going to make in the business?
Well, Panama thinks it's important enough to spend $30 million just to market the state of Georgia to get its act together. They spent $30 million in their marketing budget for the Panama Canal to convince legislators, industrial groups, that Georgia is going to benefit from the Panama Canal and should get its act together. I think it's going to be huge. And there's a wonderful video on the Discovery Channel that you can find if you Google it about the construction of the Panama Canal, how it's happening and what it's going to mean. So I recommend that you go to it. What happens here is you can almost triple the cargo that these Panama class ships can carry through the new canal, which will be ready in 2014. And that has all, again, changes wonderful in our business because, you know, for all the reasons that we cited in the presentation. But it will change. It will literally change everything. The harbors that are dredged that can take the larger ships. It will change the size of buildings. It'll change the concentration of buildings. It'll change the traffic patterns, what sites they choose around the ports. And it just means a whole lot of business for us as a result. I think Savannah and Norfolk are going to be the largest beneficiaries. And again, the 2 DC model is going to really benefit from the Panama Canal expansion. And the East Coast between Atlanta and Norfolk, I think will really, really take off for industrial development.
Does it mean there'll be a lot of unused warehouse space in the world after that?
Well, you saw the pictures that Derek showed. They're pretty ugly. We need to clean it up anyway. You know, just go drive through Chicago. You know, it's the world's changed, and it's really funny. We affiliate ourselves in Atlanta with the Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Institute because it's through their systems engineering department, and all they care about is technology and the efficiency of supply chains and efficiency of utilization of warehouse space. And you know, it's amazing to get their point of view as to where things are going. Their view is not tempered by finance at all, and we really believe that the technology going forward, like for adaptive reuse in smaller buildings, is going to be interesting. They show models of small robots that you can use in spaces that have less than 20 feet clear height. So you don't have to have racking like you had it before, because the robots actually go and they lift up the pallets and they bring the pallets to the pickers. And you can do everything a lot faster because one guy can go in and have a box order that's got to go somewhere and send all these robots scurrying across the warehouse and go basically bring it all to one packing location.
Picture of it on the right-hand side. It's called the Kiva system. It uses you can see the track on the floor. Basically, the guy stands in one spot all day, and the product comes to him to pick, and the stuff is just never stays in one spot. It keeps moving, so they can reuse all the space.
So the Georgia Tech guys think there's technology to solve all those problems for buildings that don't really work for container-driven supply chain distribution.
So each of those racks is on a mobile mover of some kind.
Yeah, the movers actually move and they pick up the shelf, move it, and then drop it and go grab the next one while the guy picks it off and goes and puts it back. So the stuff never stays in the same place at any given time. The computer system knows that. And that's sort of being implemented, but the one I've seen on the left-hand side is what's called pick-to-voice, where my friend actually works in a warehouse, uses this. He walks through the warehouse, and the system tells him where to go, what to pick, where to put it. So that way it makes sure the people are moving to the right spot at the most optimum pace. It measures their capacity. He's incentivized based upon how many picks he has in a day. They rank the efficiency of the staff. So that's one of the things that's really truly being implemented in the warehouse. So
Does this give new life to the older?
Yeah, I think that this could. I mean, there's obviously problems here. I mean, if you have a power outage and you got the robots going everywhere, well, works as long as you're telling the robots what to do. Any more questions?
I think we might have touched on this briefly previously, but for those of us who are interested in entering the real estate industry, and let's say we've decided on the industrials, that's the space we want to enter, where do you see the opportunities, entry-level opportunities being most prevalent? What's the best way to break into industrial real estate?
Well, I personally believe that anybody breaking into the business should start in either appraisal or in leasing, because that's the cutting edge of value creation, understanding value and then creating value through leasing. And if you can't, in real estate, if you learn markets, you can make money. If you know your players in your markets, you know your competitive sets that your projects are competing with. To me, that's fundamental in learning how to compete. And I started doing all the appraisals and analysis for our Orlando portfolio. And as soon as I was hired in, I realized I was totally unqualified for the job. I think that my boss liked the fact that I had a single-digit handicap at the time and was a Gator. That was good enough, But I went right back to school, got my finance degree, and went to the Appraisal Institute and spent the next 2 years taking all the appraisal courses to sort of backfill my real estate education. You guys don't have that problem. This is a fabulous opportunity for you guys to learn where you are now. But I really believe that understanding real estate analytics, underwriting, valuation, and markets is key.
You said you entered the fund business. Just tell us a little bit about that. You've got a fund, multiple funds, you're in?
Yeah, we have a large joint venture with JP Morgan and a large joint venture with Teachers, TIAA Pref. That has been going for years, but it's not really, we don't act as the investment fiduciary for the fund. IDI didn't do that. So what would happen is IDI's balance sheet, we typically have about $1 billion available for building inventory development. I did it right that time. And then we have about $2 billion in third-party managed funds. You can tax that billion pretty quickly when the market's moving and you're adding product. So our idea was, from time to time, we'll reach out to certain clients and let them co-invest equity with us, so we can maximize the use of our balance sheet to build market share. We started the funds management business when I joined in 2008. The idea there being that we'd have discretion over third-party funds to go out and buy buildings and develop buildings on behalf of pension funds, endowments, and sovereign wealth investors, sovereign wealth funds. So, we built the first fund, and it was like pushing on a rope in 2009. But we found one investor took all $500 million of that fund. So we were very, very fortunate to find that investor at that time. We've since launched. We've just finished that fund. It's fully subscribed, with the exception of one core property that we have to add, which we have in the pipeline. So we started the second fund. That's going extremely well this time. The second and third funds are always easier than the first. So we have a $500 million value-added fund that is subscribed, and we are marketing a $400 million core fund, which is going very, very well. We expect to launch that fourth quarter. Okay. Investors look at the risk spectrum in terms of value added and core for real estate. Core being stabilized returns, higher quality assets, things that you can sell easily after you decide to exit. That would be a core type investment. And they're generally very, very high-end office buildings, the highest quality industrial, and the super duper multifamily types of investments can be classified as core. And retail. And I understand Pat Stein's going to take you guys through retail investments here shortly. That's going to be great. That'll be a great asset sector to explore with him. Value-added stuff is really kind of all across the board. It depends upon the appetite of the investor. Our notion of what value add is it's more of a timing play. It's buying other people's stalled projects, buying properties that might have more vacancy than would qualify as a core. We say anything less than 80%, but typically it's more like 30 and 40% leased buildings. If the building's good, it's built right, it's in a good location, but the owner is having a problem because he's over leveraged or he's got other needs for capital and needs to exit, we would buy some of those kinds of assets right now, because as the iMAQ quadrant shows, there are certain markets that really look good, even though times are tough. There are certain markets where you would buy an empty building and say, I can lease it, especially if you know that you defined your competitive set and know every single building that's competing with that asset, so that you know I've got 300,000 feet of vacancy and there's only 2 other buildings that have 300,000 feet that can compete with that building. So if you got enough knowledge, you're willing to take the risk, you can make those kinds of value-added investments. Some of our investors also will take development risk with us. They'll stand alongside us as we go out and buy land, get it entitled, and put it into production for inventory development.
And what kind of returns are your investors looking at for core value-added and development-related projects? Just kind of order of magnitude.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting, because I'm afraid that what I call core returns today have changed so much in the last 60 or 90 days that they may be value add. I'll tell you, when we were marketing the first fund, core returns were, say, 12%. That's how tight capital was. You're looking at extremely high internal rates of return, and those are leveraged IRRs. Okay, leveraged IRRs. I would say today, well, let's talk about unleveraged. Unleveraged is easier, so you can take out the effects of the ridiculously low debt levels or debt rates today. But for industrial real estate today, it's probably a good core unleveraged internal rate of return is probably 7. And it was 200 to 300 basis points higher 18 months ago. That's how fast it's corrected. For value add, probably unleveraged 11 to 12 in that range. Now, but again, even 6 months ago, those would have been 14, 15. So it's changing quickly. And when you can go out and borrow interest only again from the largest banks, and they're willing to do 5 years of interest only debt at 3.5%, it's kind of hard not to make any project work. It's like free money. So we're very thankful that we've had a very good run through the crisis. We've had no issues with any of our bankers. We've repaid every dollar that was owed. We've never given the keys back and never would, which is absolutely key. It is why the bank's willing to make those kinds of deals right now. So can't say that for the rest of our competition. Somebody asked this question earlier, and it was a great question. What's happened to the competitive universe? And 70% of what we do was really run by moms and pops in small offices, where guys would go out and get a piece of land and do a nice job in a warehouse with a general contractor, lease it up, and then sell it. All those guys are gone. The Panettones of the world are completely different companies. A&B and Prologis, who are the largest, have merged because Prologis had issues. So, and they're selling enormous amounts of property in all the heartland markets in the middle of the United States, which is a great opportunity for us. And having weathered this storm, we kind of look at the competitive landscape and realize we've done pretty darn well. We're bruised like everybody, but the banks are with us. The competitive landscape looks a lot more promising, and we believe that demand will come back.
Mentioned that the small players are gone, and there are like only 2 national players in industrial real estate.
Well, there's more than 2, but the 2 big national developers were really there were 3: Prologis, A&B, and IDI, and to some extent Duke. Duke's also done a great job. But all the moms and pops, the smaller local developers are pretty much out of the picture because they can't get that financing, and that's what drove the whole game.
Do you think that adversely affects the opportunities for a new guy who wants to get into industrial real estate, because companies are getting less? So is that the opportunities also going down, or how is it?
No, I really believe in the resiliency of the American economy. I mean, and I think those moms and pops will come back. I think it's going to take a little more time, and I believe that's the strength of our economy, that we can build new businesses, and we're nimble. You know, the capital markets are open and they're fair, and they value good opportunities. And you'll see new businesses develop. You'll see people that are left from the largest A and B merger go out and start new businesses in a couple of years, and it'll all start up again.
More questions? Well, this is a fantastic, I think, introduction to IDI and to logistics, this realm of real estate. So, thank you both.
Thank you for having me.